What if the Soviet Union wasn't defeated by Ronald Reagan's military buildup, or by the courage of dissidents, or even by the weight of its own ideology? What if the most powerful communist empire in human history was brought to its knees by a phone call, a secret meeting in a desert palace, and the decision to open an oil valve? This is the story they don't teach in textbooks. This is the story of how the Cold War was won, not on a battlefield, but on a balance sheet.
Cast your mind back to 1980. Pull up a map of the world and look at it the way a Western leader would have. What you see is terrifying. The Soviet Union sprawls across 11 time zones. It commands 40,000 nuclear warheads. It has 4 million soldiers standing ready, poised to sweep across the plains of Europe at a moment's notice. From the outside looking in, from the offices in Washington, London, and Paris, the Soviet bear looks indestructible.
It looks like something that could last 1,000 years.
But here's what those leaders couldn't see from the outside. If you set aside the missile parades rolling through Red Square and instead opened the ledgers sitting inside the Soviet Ministry of Finance, the picture that emerged wasn't terrifying, it was tragic. Because behind the armor and the pageantry, a superpower was dying. Its economy was rotting silently from the inside out, sustained by one thing and one thing only: oil.
By the late 1970s, the Soviet Union had quietly transformed itself from a diversified industrial giant into something far more fragile. It had become a petrostate, an addict, and its drug of choice was high-priced crude oil. For decades, the communist system had been failing its people in plain sight. Factories were inefficient. Collective farms couldn't grow enough wheat to feed the population. Technology was lagging 2 full decades behind the West.
But then, in the early 1970s, the Soviet Union got lucky. The Arab oil embargo sent global energy prices soaring, and billions of dollars in hard currency came flooding into Moscow like a lifeline.
It was, for the aging men of the Politburo, nothing short of a miracle. They used that oil money to buy American grain and feed their people. They used it to purchase the technology they couldn't invent themselves. They used it to fund a massive military expansion and prop up communist regimes from Cuba to Vietnam. As long as oil prices stayed high, the Soviet Union could keep pretending. They believed the party would last forever.
But in Washington, someone had noticed the cracks.
In January 1981, Ronald Reagan walked into the White House, and with him came a team of hardliners who had no patience for the old strategy of containment. They didn't want to coexist with the Soviet Union. They wanted to end it. And one man above all others would become the architect of that ambition. His name was William Casey, the new director of the Central Intelligence Agency. Casey was an old spy, a veteran of the OSS, who had run agents behind Nazi lines during World War II.
He understood that war was not only fought with bullets and bombs. War was also fought with money, with logistics, with ledgers.
Casey looked at the Soviet Union the way a forensic accountant examines a failing business. He ordered a classified study of the Soviet economy, and the report that landed on his desk was explosive. It revealed that the Soviet Union was earning up to 80% of its hard currency from oil and gas exports. It revealed that the Kremlin needed oil prices above a critical threshold just to keep the lights on. If that price dropped, the Soviet Empire wouldn't face a recession.
It would face a cardiac arrest.
Casey had found the Achilles heel of the evil empire, but he couldn't exploit it alone. America was an oil buyer, not a seller. To crash the market, he needed a partner with enough crude to flood the world.
He needed the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. What followed is one of the most secretive and consequential diplomatic missions of the entire Cold War. In the early 1980s, the Saudis were officially neutral. They controlled OPEC and they liked high prices because high prices made them wealthy. Convincing them to deliberately destroy the price of their own product was, on the surface, an almost impossible sell. But Casey didn't come to Riyadh with money. He came with something the Saudi royal family wanted even more: survival.
The Middle East at that moment was a powder keg. The Iranian Revolution had just reshaped the region. Soviet troops had invaded Afghanistan and were creeping closer to the Saudi oil fields. The House of Saud was surrounded by enemies and consumed by fear. Casey laid out a chilling picture of Soviet encirclement. He offered American military protection, AWACS surveillance aircraft, Stinger missiles, and an iron guarantee that the United States would never allow the Saudi kingdom to fall.
In exchange, he asked for one thing: open the taps.
He also made a moral argument. The Soviets were slaughtering Muslims in Afghanistan. By bankrupting Moscow, the Saudis would be striking a blow for the entire Islamic world. The arguments worked. The alliance was sealed in private, in the desert, far from cameras and diplomats. It was an economic death warrant for the Soviet Union, signed with a handshake.
By 1985, everything was in place. In Moscow, a new leader named Mikhail Gorbachev had taken power. He was energetic, reform-minded, and quietly desperate. He knew the economy was in trouble and had drafted a sweeping plan to fix it. But Gorbachev was working from a fatal assumption, that oil would stay around $30 a barrel. He didn't know that the rope he was counting on to catch his fall had already been cut.
In September of 1985, Saudi Arabia's oil minister made an announcement that sounded, to the uninitiated, like a dry technical policy change. The kingdom would no longer act as a swing producer protecting global prices. Instead, it would fight for market share. In the trading pits of New York and London, seasoned traders understood immediately what that meant. The dam had broken.
The Saudis opened the pumps with full force. Within weeks, millions of additional barrels of crude poured into an already saturated market. Supply overwhelmed demand. The price collapsed. $30 became $25, then $20, then $15. In Moscow, the initial reaction was confusion. The Soviet planners had seen dips before. They assumed the market would correct itself. They kept spending money they didn't have, kept fighting in Afghanistan, kept subsidizing Poland and East Germany and Cuba. They were burning through reserves while waiting for a recovery that was never coming.
The price kept falling. By early 1986, it had hit $10 a barrel. Every single dollar that fell from the price of oil cost the Soviet Union roughly $1 billion a year in lost revenue. At $10, the Soviets were losing money pumping oil from Siberia. It cost them more to extract than they could sell it for. Their greatest source of power had become a liability overnight.
And then, in April of 1986, Chernobyl exploded. Billions of dollars in cleanup costs landed on an economy that was already hemorrhaging. The timing was catastrophic. Secret memos flooded into Gorbachev's office from his finance ministers. The coffers were empty. Import of machinery had to stop. Consumer goods shelves, already bare, became completely empty. No soap, no sugar, no shoes, no medicine.
The social contract of the Soviet state, surrender your freedom and we will provide for your basic needs, had been broken.
The strikes began. Coal miners in Siberia put down their tools, not out of political ideology,
but because there was no soap to wash the coal dust off their faces. The anger in the streets grew. Gorbachev, desperate, sent diplomats to beg for loans from West Germany and even from the United States. The leader of the communist world, hat in hand, asking the capitalists for a handout. And the loans came with conditions: political reforms, human rights concessions, withdrawal from Afghanistan.
Financial weakness had forced political surrender.
By 1989, the Soviet Union was selling gold bars in London and Zurich just to buy wheat. Gorbachev cut the military budget and quietly told the leaders of Eastern Europe that the subsidies were finished. They were on their own. When Berliners began hammering at the wall in November of 1989, Soviet guards received orders from Moscow to stand down. Not because Gorbachev had experienced a change of heart, because Moscow couldn't afford to do anything else.
The tanks stayed in the barracks because there was no money to fuel them.
The Soviet Union formally dissolved on December 26, 1991. Commentators spoke of the triumph of democracy, the failure of communist ideology, the power of the human spirit, and all of that was true. But the man who quietly turned off the lights was also an oil minister who opened a valve in 1985. The Cold War ended not with a bang, but with a margin call.
The lesson that echoes loudest from this story is simple and brutal. A nation that builds its power on a single resource rather than on the creativity and resilience of its people is building on sand. Venezuela learned it. Russia is still learning it. The oil weapon that defeated the Soviet Union remains the template for every economic sanction, every financial blockade, every dollar-denominated act of modern warfare that has followed.
Empires don't always fall in a single dramatic explosion. Sometimes they fall because the check bounces. The Soviet Union had enough nuclear warheads to destroy the world 10 times over, but in the end, it couldn't buy bread.
If you made it this far, you already know you love this kind of history, the kind that changes how you see the world. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss a story like this one. Every week, we go deeper into the hidden forces that shaped civilization, the secret deals, the economic weapons, the decisions made in back rooms that changed everything. We'll see you in the next one.